welcome back to the channel and more Pillage coverage as we work on a mini-series here covering the different factions. We'll take a look at some of the pros and cons of each faction, some ideas for possible list building, and then just kind of seeing what the differences are. The neat thing with the game is the differences are fairly subtle in the sense of, not like let's say like a game like 40K or something like that, right? You're not going to have a whole book covering your army and a million different variations and other things to remember. It's all pretty simple, right? There's a kind of a somewhat fixed set of weaponry, right? Everyone has access to swords, spears, stuff like that. Some people get access to bows, some get crossbows, little things like that. War dogs, things like that. So, and then aside from that, there's usually one or two faction special rules, and then it's really just some of those slight differences, and also like army composition and stuff like that. And the game has some nice internal balance too. Can't have too many cavalry necessarily, barring other special rules. Can't have too many archers. So the focus is on just combat, not spamming one particular thing. So we'll start off with probably the go-to poster child faction, and that is the Vikings, or the Norse. So their special rule is they never take any penalties of any sort for morale. This means that they'll only ever break on a roll of 1. So what that means, and what will make them pretty hard to go against, is the fact that, again, they're not really, barring some just really bad rolling, really going to break from the fight, right? You're going to have to just deal with them and put them down in most cases, right? So expecting to like break their morale and get them to start running off the board, unrealistic. So let's take a look at what they have, and this is pretty much how each army list is laid out. You got like one page of stuff here, which makes it easy to get into and kind of get a handle on what your faction does, but also what the other factions do if you're going up against them. So 2 things they get 0 access to: huscarls, because that's a Saxon thing, and no war wagons. They do, and the nice thing is the base cost for most guys is 10. Special guys are listed here, so they do have access to a healer, and they basically get a free, we're kind of starting on the other end here, they're not capable of having armor, and they basically just get an improvised weapon, so like a dagger or something like that. So your base warrior for these guys is 10, chieftain is running at 30, and berserkers are 50. So the chieftain's going to have more, or the most wounds, and is obviously your leader, but the berserkers are their cool, unique unit too. So unarmored is free. Across the board, armor costs 5 and shields cost 5, so pretty standard stuff there. The improvised weapons, again, if you want just base cost guys, is also free. Spears, again, across the board will run you 5. Hand weapons will be 10. You do pay a little bit more for that. And then the Dane axe, which is pretty nasty, is 15 a pop. And really, and you'll see that a lot, especially with the huscarls, but the Dane axe for these guys also. So, although the Saxons do make better use of it in some cases here. Ranged weapons, they get slings, as you might expect, javelins and bows, pretty standard stuff here. And in contrast to the Saxons, for example, when we review them, these guys get cheaper bows by 5 gold, which will add up over time. No access to crossbows, which makes sense. So all in all, they have pretty much most of the melee weapons and a good selection of ranged. Pretty standard costs there. They don't get access to cavalry, so that's the one drawback to them, right? So they're going to be all infantry based. Their banners are going to run 50, and you have access to different warriors for that. So again, you could put it on a warrior, a chieftain, or the berserker, which doesn't necessarily seem like the best option, but could be an interesting strategy. The war horn's going to run you 20, so again, they get that at a discount as well versus the Saxons. It does seem like the Saxons pay for a lot compared to some of the other groups, but we'll get into that. And then Warhounds, though, they get access to those. Now they're 60 gold a pop, so that's quite a bit, right? If you think you can get about 3 or 4 regular warriors kitted up pretty decently for that price of the one set of Warhounds there. So that is the bulk of the Vikings. Again, the Berserker, which will have its own special rules, which we'll cover here in just a second, is kind of their special, unique unit, and kind of their big sort of shtick that they can do, and their dastardly to face in combat. So we'll be right back, and we'll take a look at what the Berserker does for us. Alrighty, guys, so as part of the Vikings group here, so they get the Berserkers. So yeah, extremely violent warriors. Start of the game, obviously you got to declare which models those are, and again, pretty much everything in the game is WYSIWYG, right? So we need to properly model that, but that can be fun as part of the hobby part. As would be naturally expected, cavalry can't be berserkers, and berserkers can't have thrown or ranged weapons. They do get 2 hit points, which is interesting and kind of makes the Vikings really powerful in that sense that they get multiple models that can have multiple hit points, right? Typically it's just your leader, but these guys can bring multiple two hit point warriors, which is pretty nasty. They do pay a premium for that, but still. And when it attacks, it does so with such terrible violence that its opponent's defense is quite simply canceled. So then has hallucinogenic mushrooms is also the special rule there. So they can choose to ingest those mushrooms, and it's basically at the start of the movement phase, and then it stays in effect until the end of the game. So while under the effect of that, they also get 2 attacks instead of 1. So you got potentially 2 HP and 2 attack models galore on the list. Again, you're going to pay a lot for those warriors, but you get a lot too, and you can be a little bit more aggressive too with them. And the opponent's going to definitely focus on those to a certain extent, leaving some of your other forces hopefully unscathed. Now, the only downside with the mushrooms is that the warrior could get confused. So on a 1, they're rooted to the spot, and they basically have wonderful fantasies, but can't really do anything. So now if they're already in melee, they can't attack and make defense rolls with actual -1 penalty. 2 through 5, everything is fine, so they act normally and have that normal attack, so most of the time you're going to be just a-okay. Now on a 6, it can be nasty though. You go into a bloody rage. If you're not already in melee, you charge towards the closest visible figures, friend or foe, and that will help, or will actually force you into kind of being careful with your deployment, right? If you're keeping these guys close to friends and you pop the mushrooms, then there's a chance that they could attack allies. We've seen it happen, but on the other hand, you can spread out somewhat from your foes or from your friends, and then just kind of get in there with the enemy. But anyway, the charge adds D6 instead of D3 to the distance when this one happens. If there's no visible figures, you remain in place as though confused. So there'd have to be a fair bit of terrain out for you to not have any anything visible there. But if you set this up right, and you do happen to roll the 6, and ideally make sure that only enemy figures are there, you get a better charge out of it, and then it's essentially the same as normal. You will attack and do your thing. So ideally, it's hard to counteract that as an opposing player. So dealing with them at range ideally is probably the best bet. Trying to at least put 1 wound on them before they get in. But if the terrain can dictate that the opponent has to stay somewhat close to his own guys, and maybe if they're closer, then you get the odd chance of them fighting their own forces and hopefully wasting time and hurting their own allies. But yeah, so the other sort of just kind of crazy upside that they get, they're basically, if they cause a wound, the opponent doesn't get a defense roll, and basically gets eliminated. So as long as they hit, and with those extra attacks, right, 2 attacks apiece, they're just going to start chopping opponents apart. So again, the big strategy with them, or against them, really is going to have to be to ideally start putting wounds on them before they get in, and ideally even just killing them outright. So focus firing berserkers is going to be, I think, a big thing. Let us know your experience so far with the berserkers and what your thoughts are on the Vikings overall. Are they still balanced, or do you feel like as the game is right now that they can be a little bit overpowered? Hit us up in the comments, let us know your thoughts, and we'll go from there. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll be back with more Pillage.